What's happening, guys? Mr. Rouge again, and today we're talking about the 4 biological molecules. Each video is going to cover only one, and the first one we're going to talk about are carbohydrates, okay? Now, let's think back to the last video that we watched. The last video we talked about monomers and polymers. To refresh your memory, a monomer is a single building block. Remember, mono meant one, mer meant part. So one part. A polymer would be like this. It's many parts that are bonded together. So it's a very large structure. Think back to that Lego chair that I showed you, okay? So it's a very large structure. Okay. Let's go into carbohydrates now. Let's take a look at these food sources that we have. We have bread, a potato, white rice, beans, and corn. If you were to cut open this bread, just think in your head, what would the inside of that bread look like? How about these beans? If you were to cut open these beans, what does the inside of that bean look like? Or even this corn. Crack open a kernel, or even think of popcorn. What color is popcorn, right? All of these food items, they all have starch. That white substance in there, okay, is starch. That's what plants actually use as food. And actually what we are doing as animals, we're eating that starch. We're stealing their food, okay? So the plants are making it for themselves, but we're actually consuming that for ourselves, okay? So bread comes from wheat, and we're taking that flour from the wheat, which is starch, and we're creating it into bread, okay? And we're eating that. So, everything on this slide, go ahead and please take note. Put it on pause as I go, though, okay? So first, carbohydrates. Let's look at the building block, or the monomer for carbohydrates. The monomer is called a monosaccharide. Monosaccharide. You already know what the prefix mono means. Mono means one. This suffix right here, saccharide, is a fancy word for sugar. So a monosaccharide literally translates to one sugar. Now, when I refer to sugars by their name, most of them end in -ose. Okay, so anytime you hear that suffix -ose, that means that's a sugar. Okay. So glucose is one single sugar. It's called a monosaccharide. Galactose is a milk sugar. We find that in milk products, okay? Fructose is fruit sugar. We find that in fruit, obviously, from the name. And it does have a little bit different structure than galactose and glucose. And now there's another category called disaccharides, okay? So all of these right here, these are examples of monosaccharides, and they all end in -ose. A disaccharide is two sugars. So sucrose, that's table sugar. That's, if you've ever added sugar to anything at your house, it was sucrose, okay? And sucrose is one glucose and one fructose bonded together. If you've ever heard of the phrase lactose or lactose intolerance, lactose is another milk sugar, okay? And it's actually glucose and galactose bonded together. That forms a disaccharide. And now let's talk about polysaccharides. Polysaccharides, just like a polymer was many parts or many units bonded together. A polysaccharide is many. What does saccharide mean? Saccharide means sugar. So a polysaccharide is many sugars bonded together. And if you've ever heard this phrase, or these two words, complex carbohydrates, that's what a polysaccharide is. It's a complex carbohydrate. Okay, and I'll show you pictures of those in just a moment. What's the function of a polysaccharide? It's fast energy. Okay, when we eat carbohydrates, it gives super fast energy. Plants also make it for structure. Okay, so plants will use a polysaccharide for a food source, which is the starch. Okay, and they could also use it for structure, such as the outside of this corn is a polysaccharide, but it's made for structure, not for food. So some examples of carbohydrates is number one, starch. And if you take a look at this starch, you can see that it's a very larger molecule, but it's made up of repeating glucose molecules. Okay, these are all little glucose molecules, but they're all bonded together. Okay. Another example is glycogen. Okay, so starch is a stored plant carbohydrate. Glycogen is a stored animal carbohydrate. This will enter our muscles. Okay. And then lastly, cellulose. Cellulose is very, very complex, and this is what plants use for structure. What do all three of these have in common? Let's take a look at these. What do all three of these have in common? They're all made up of the same repeating glucose molecules, okay? But they're all very different, okay, once they're all bonded together. Okay, so go ahead and take note of this, and let me show you guys another example of what this looks like. So, we have carbohydrates. Again, this is food. We get the starch from the plants and we're eating it, okay? This is our blood. So what happens when we eat carbohydrates? First of all, that starch gets broken down into simple monomers, gets broken down into glucose. That glucose is going to enter our bloodstream. Well, what just happened to that cellulose? Cellulose, better known as fiber, this is so complex we actually can't digest it, so we actually eliminate it in the toilet, okay? The glucose goes into our blood. After it hits our blood, it's going to go to our liver and to our muscles and get reassembled into glycogen. Because remember, glycogen is an animal form of carbohydrates. Starch is a plant form of carbohydrates. So we're going to eat that starch, break it down into glucose, that hits our blood, and then it gets stored in our liver and our muscles as glycogen, okay? Okay, this is the big idea of carbohydrates that I want you to know. Number one, the building block of all carbohydrates are monosaccharides. Okay, that's the monomer, monosaccharides, one sugar. What's the function of carbohydrates is fast energy. That's why we eat carbohydrates, because it gives us really, really quick energy. And also the other function is its structure in plants as cellulose, which is also known as fiber. Examples, glucose, fructose, and sucrose. These are all very simple sugars. Okay. Monosaccharide, this is a monosaccharide, this is a disaccharide. And then I want you to know complex examples, starch, glycogen, and cellulose. Starch is a plant form of stored carbohydrates, of stored energy. Glycogen is animal form of stored carbohydrate, and cellulose is used for structure in plants. Okay, that's it for today, folks, and we'll go over this more in class later. Peace.